Welcome to the third lecture on phonology in this course, NPTEL MOOC course on Phonetics and Phonology, a broad overview. So, continuing with Unit 5, Phonology, let us recap the things that we studied in the last class. So, we now know that phonology is a field of linguistics which studies the distribution of sounds in a language as well as the interaction between those different sounds. And also, phonology tackles the following questions. What are the predictable sounds in a language? What is the phonetic context? And which sounds affect the meanings of words? And these are more or less the most important things, and we saw in great detail as to phonetic context. We saw how English consonants can be different based on the environment, how alveolar sound will be dental if there is a following dental fricative, like a l can be pronounced as a velarized dental l, as in wealth, because of the following dental fricative. Now let us look at how phonemes look like in different languages of the world, and recall that we have looked in great detail as to consonants in other languages, and if you have gone through the previous lectures on sounds of the world's languages, you have seen the great diversity that is available in the languages of the world. Now, when we look at the phonemic system in general, then we see that this phonemic system in Madison's Sounds of the World's Languages 1984 survey shows that this constitutes almost the 40% of languages in the world. So, what are these? These are the sounds that we have seen a lot: the labial plosives, the alveolar plosives, and these two affricates, post-alveolar affricates, the velar stops, and then the fricative f, the fricative s, fricative sh, the nasals m, n, and l, y, and w. So, these consonants are quite common in languages of the world, and also among vowels, the 5 vowel inventory is quite common in the languages of the world. So, generally this is a phonemic system which can be expected, but we know from our previous lectures that it may not be so, because a lot of complexity can exist in the consonant inventories of different languages. Normally, an inventory will contain additional, more unusual sounds, as we already know. So, unusual sounds often occur in multiple languages in the same geographic area. So, that can also happen. And a phonemic distinction in one language might be allophonic in another. So, now we have the phonemic distinction which is allophonic in another language. We have an example from English and Spanish. And English and Spanish examples that you see here is with regard to the tap sound that we have here. So, in English, varieties of English have a tap sound in this context, where it is preceded and followed by vowel sounds in an unstressed position. Now, that tap in English, which is phonetic, the environment is vowels on both sides in an unstressed position. In other languages, that can be it can be different. And so, in English, now if we take the sound T, then if in initial and final positions, it is the same T. Okay. But the T can change in this environment when preceding and following there are vowels in an unstressed position. So, T goes to a tap when there is a preceding vowel and a following vowel which is unstressed. The phoneme T is realized as a tap when it is preceded by a vowel and followed by a stressless vowel. And we can now see a derivation that we had seen previously. So, let us see the derivation now. So, where do you have vowels between the T in this case and in this case, right? And now we have T, a word initially, word finally. So this is our data set. Now additional information about stress. So this vowel is stressed, but this vowel is not stressed, and all these are monosyllables, so they are stressed. However, this vowel is stressed, the following vowel is stressed in attend. Okay, so now data and attend are two different ways in which t can be pronounced because of the distribution of vowels and the stressless vowel in particular. So where does the tapping rule apply? In this one, where it is flanked by vowels on both sides and there is no stress. So we have data, we have tan, we have cat, and we have attend. And however, now we have seen that flapping rule in English. Now we have Spanish, where the flapping rule is, there is no flapping rule, they are just minimal pairs. They occur in exactly the same environment. So the flap is there in contrast and they are separate phonemes. In English, t and r difference is allophonic, non-distinctive. Remember that if it's allophonic, it's non-distinctive and it's in complementary distribution. And in Spanish, the and the difference is phonemic, that is distinctive. So we could easily establish that in English, that in Spanish, these are two separate phonemes because we have a minimal pair. So what did the minimal pair show? That in exactly the same environment where we have two words where stress is initial, followed by a vowel, followed by t, and followed by flap here, and where this is the stress syllable is this one, this is the unstressed syllable. Similarly here, stress syllable is this one, so it's the unstressed syllable. In exactly the same environment, the and the flap is occurring, whereas in English that is not happening. In English, this t would not have occurred. It would have been the same word because the context determines that in this position there will be the flap t. As a result, we will not get the minimal pair that we are getting in Spanish because in Spanish they are phonemes. So phonemicization is the body of knowledge and techniques that can be used to work out the phonemic system of a language. And minimal pairs, the most effective method in phonemization is to look for minimal pairs. And minimal pairs are two different words that differ exactly in exactly one sound in the same position, exactly the same position as we saw for Spanish. With regard to Spanish, that the t and the flap, they're both occurring in exactly the same position, and these are two different words with two different meanings. The absence of a minimal pair does not prove much because there are also phonemes which lack minimal pairs, but that is almost the first test that is done to check if they are phonemes. And it's also known to be the most effective method in phonemization to look for minimal pairs. So a language might lack minimal pairs for a few phonemes by accident. So if we look at this set of vowels, we see that we do not get the entire paradigm of her and the in the context where they are always occurring. So what happened here, we had for this one we had to use howd and who'd, so which are not really minimal pairs, but these are contractions cliticized, and as a result we get these words, and those kind of things might always happen. We may not find exact minimal pairs, but we can see that they are still phonemes. Then in phonemicization, we also find near minimal pairs. There are cases in which it is impossible to find minimal pairs for a phoneme. And this occurs in languages with long words and large phoneme inventories. And near minimal pairs are pairs which would be minimal except for some evidently irrelevant difference. So some near minimal pairs for the and je. So we have tether and pleasure. We have neither and seizure. So are these exact minimal pairs? No, they're not exact minimal pairs, because for tether we do not have leisure. For neither, we do not have leisure. For lather, we do not have leisure. So, why are these near minimal pairs? Because the following context is the same, but the preceding is not exactly the same. So, for instead of ni, we have si here, neither, seizure, and instead of la, we have a here. So, these are called near minimal pairs. So, if there are large phoneme inventories, then we may not find too many minimal pairs, and near minimal pairs are almost minimal pairs, but some not so important difference is always, it can be seen in near minimal pairs. So, the phonemic environment has nothing to do with whether the or je occurs, the phonetic environment. And to find the rules that determine the appearance of the versus je, I would have to make use of a completely arbitrary collection of environments for these phones. And if the rules cannot be found, then an analysis that claims that the and je are allophones cannot be justified. So, we do not have rules for the appearance of the and je as allophones, and hence we cannot collect environments for these phones. And if the rules cannot be found, an analysis that claims that the and je are actually occurring in complementary distribution, it cannot be justified. So, obviously, minimal pairs, it is the most straightforward method to establish phonemes, and also near minimal pairs require much more work because there is a little difference there between the pairs. And minimal and near minimal pairs are used to establish that two sounds belong to separate phonemes, just like minimal pairs. And for establishing that two sounds are in the same phoneme, we need to establish that they are in complementary distribution. So, if they are variants, that they are different manifestations of the same phoneme, we have to establish that they are in complementary distribution. And also, it is useful to follow the method of compiling local environments. And compiling local environments for each sound, we construct a list of all its appearance each time, including the preceding segment, and if any, and the following segment, if any. For any given data set, it is important to do this work to establish whether two sounds are in an allophonic relationship or if they are different phonemes. So, the method of finding out complementary distributions is to compile local environments, and for each sound we construct a list of all its appearances each time, and including the preceding segment, the following segment, and follow the data carefully to do this. So, we can look at this Masai data from Hayes 2009 Phonology Introduction, and we can look at these three consonants k, g, and r. You notice that they are all back velar, and while these two are stops and this is a fricative and the voice fricative, and we compile their environment. So, this is what is meant by compiling local environments. So, when you compile local environments, we look at the preceding and the following segment. So, this is what is being done here. So, we have compiled the local environments here and we have found these. Now, look at k. You can see that k occurs in a variety of environments. Word initially when it's so in a medial position after the word, initial bracket, and this is how we represent that, and between a consonant and a vowel, and also word finally, as this is shown. This is the word final position, this is the boundary, and preceding that also you will get k. However, we do not get all these different word initial, word final, and vowel and consonant environments for g. For g, we see it's very consistently following a nasal and a vowel. Also, for the velar fricative, we see consistently throughout the data set in 9 examples, we see that it is always occurs when it's flanked by 2 vowels on both sides. Now, this is fairly clear that there is some complementary distribution at work here, because we see clearly that k is occurring in all these different environments, whereas g and r are very restricted. And we saw the complementary distribution at work here, and the environments are very clearly what we saw is that g, when g occurs, is always n, and then for h there is always 2 vowels flanked, and k we cannot write an environment for k because it occurs in so many diverse environments, and we do not have any uniform environment which can be written in a simplistic manner. Now, that is one established way in which we decide complementary distributions and therefore find phonemes in a language. So, one important thing that we see here is that of spirantization. So, what does spirantization mean? It means that when a stop changes to a fricative, so it becomes a softer, it is called weakening or hardening also. So, stop becomes a fricative. This process is called spirantization. And what is the stop which changes to a fricative here? Here it is a velar stop which becomes a velar fricative. And between 2 vowels, when it is flanked by 2 vowels, k changes to r. And also we find post-nasal voicing, that is when k becomes g, there is always ng preceding it. And whenever there is a nasal, the k becomes g in this context because of the preceding nasal. It takes a feature of voiced, and that is called post-nasal voicing. So, if we look at the derivation here now, we see that we have the 2 words there, cocoa, which is grandmother, and garment diminutive is enkila, and trees is ilkek. Now, if we have k spirantization, now what happens in k spirantization? K becomes a fricative. So, it becomes r, and then which will happen in this environment, k will become r. So, cocoa will become koho, and then we have g here, post nasal voicing, because of the preceding nasal, with the k becomes g here, so it will be engila. And now from our underlying forms here we see that the surface forms are koho, engila, and this one is ilkek, and there is no change because we do not have the particular environments required for the change. So, as we had talked about this in the previous class, that phonology hypothesizes rules to characterize the variation. So, whereas phonetics sounds vary with their context, phonology we study the rules, and you have seen quite a few rules in the previous class as well as in this lecture. And also you have an idea now about what we mean by varying with the context, and what we mean by rules, and what we mean by sequencing and distribution. And of course, some other things related to phonology we will cover in the following lectures. Now, the goal of a phonemic analysis is to produce a minimal set of phonemes for the language, and it will be a set smaller than the total number of sounds in that language, and with the set of phonemes every utterance can be analyzed phonetically. So, once we have the phonemes and we understand the rules governing the occurrence of the phones, we can analyze, we can predict the environments in which it will change its shape. And for every pair of sounds, we may be able to determine if they are allophones of the same phoneme, or if they are allophones of different phonemes, and whether 2 sounds occur in free variation. So, as the name suggests, when 2 sounds occur in free variation, then the variation cannot be expressed with rules. So, the variation is free, so it can occur in a context which cannot be described by a rule, but the meanings will not change. Only one of the sounds occur, that is complementary distribution, and this can also be expressed with allophonic rules. As we have already gone through this, what is complementary distribution? When 2 sounds are in complementary distribution, then the contexts in which they occur do not overlap, and the allophones of a phoneme must be in free variation or in complementary distribution or both. So, as we just heard, a free variation and complementary distribution can both exist in a language, and in complementary distribution we know the exact environment in which something will occur. With free variation, that kind of rule writing is not possible. Something which is important and we have studied a lot is the importance of context. The analysis consists of organizing the context by seeing which sounds occur in which context. And we have to remember the set of possible contexts are always quite large, and we start with the most general set of contexts and then refine it on the basis of data. And what immediately follows and precedes is always relevant, and as well as the major sounds and the boundaries of words. As you saw, it was expressed with word. If it is word beginning, then this is how we express it. If it is end of a word, then we express it. This is how boundaries are expressed. Sometimes it is also expressed with a hashtag, word, or if this is the start, beginning, or if it is the end. So, these are various ways of representation of boundaries, and also the square brackets show the beginning and the end of a row. So, something we will introduce here is that of the idea of a natural class, and we will study features in more detail, but we have to give an idea about what natural classes are. So, the idea of natural classes is an idea developed within generative phonology, and natural class of sounds in any complete set of sounds is in a given language that share the same value for a feature or set of features. So, the three nasals ma, na and ng in Maasai and in English form a natural class because they constitute the complete set of sounds that share the feature plus nasal. So, this is a natural class, and all three of them share a feature, important feature, that's nasal. Ta and ka form a natural class in Maasai and English because they constitute the plus stop minus voice sounds of the language. And note that we are using categories that we have already seen before: stop and plosive and voice and fricative. When we actually talk about features, then we will see a change in these features. In the following lectures, this will become clear. Now, expression of rules in this manner became more and more relevant in generative phonology, and here we are showing you a glimpse of that process. So, the process of spirantization, where we saw that k goes to g when it is between two vowels. Okay. So, this is now, this can be now expressed like this, that the plus stop minus voice becomes plus voice minus stop plus fricative in the environment where there are two vowels. So, this now shows that the stop is not a stop any longer, but becomes a fricative, and it shows the spirantization process instead of just showing that k becomes r. So, a voiceless stop is realized a corresponding voice fricative when surrounded by vowels. So, this is our rule, and now this is being expressed with these features. Instead of just putting the phoneme, we are now describing what those phonemes are. And also, if you recall Maasai, we have another thing happening there, that we have post nasal voicing. So, in post nasal voicing, a stop becomes plus voice, and that is a minus voice stop becomes plus voice because there is a following nasal. And a voiceless stop is realized as the corresponding voice stop when it follows a nasal consonant, and that is our post nasal voicing, and it can be expressed like this instead of just expressing it as k. Instead of saying that k goes to g in the environment where there is a ng. This the expression of this shows that there is a change in voice, just like this showed that there is a change from stop to fricative. And instead of writing the phonemes, if we add the description, then it captures generalizations. So phonological rules are based on phonetic features, and the set of sounds a rule applies to is a set of sounds that share a particular phonetic feature or set of features. And rules often change only one or two features of a sound rather than making massive alterations. And the rules of Maasai alter voicing and stop fricative distinctions, and you can see that there are only one or two features involved. And there are one or two features involved, and again repeating the first point, that is set of sounds a rule applies to, it is a set of sounds that share a particular phonetic feature or a set of features. So the rule applies to, so here the rule applies to k, and k becomes r. So what are the features that they share? They share the feature of place of articulation. So k and r are both velar, and they change in this environment. They become both plus voice. So they become g in the environment where when it occurs in this environment, when k occurs in this environment flanked by two vowels, it becomes r. The important point pointed out here is that they share a particular feature, and that's what we're talking about. What feature these two share? They share the place of articulation. Point number one. Point number two, rules often change only one or two features of a sound. And here, how many features have changed? It has changed two features. It has changed from stop to fricative, and it has changed from voiceless to voiced. So we do not find many more featural changes, and that is another thing that is important while noting the environments. The sounds appearing in the environment of a rule are almost always a set of sounds that share a particular phonetic feature or features. So the rule of English that shortens vowels applies before the complete set of consonants in English minus voice. Now we have gone through most of the aspects of a phonemic analysis, how to arrive at a set of phonemes, how to put down the local environments, that is the preceding, following, how to write a rule, how we express x goes to y in the environment z, and what are the other things that we have to keep in mind while we are looking for local environments, how features are important, how we can show that something changed to something else because there were some common features involved, or that there are not too many changes and there are always minimal changes involved. And also we have talked about complementary distribution and contrastive distribution, and also distinctiveness, which is important to find out minimal pairs. We have also seen near minimal pairs. Let us now also look at some more aspects with regard to phonemes. An important idea that can be attributed to Sapir, who wrote a paper by the same name, The Psychological Reality of the Phoneme, is exactly that, the psychological reality of a phoneme. So how are phonemes psychologically real? We will talk about that in more detail, and before that let us prepare ourselves to understand that with a few examples. So contrastiveness plays a major role in the perception of language users. When phonetically two sounds are heard by two different listeners A and B, for listener A the sounds are contrastive, they distinguish different words in her language, and the sounds also occur in listener B's language are not contrastive, they are allophones. And A can hear the difference between two sounds with perfect ease, but B has great difficulty. So, but remember, the sounds occur in both A as well as B's languages. Why is it easier for A to hear the difference, and why is it difficult for B to hear that? And now we have an example from Bengali and American English as given in Hayes 2009 Introductory Phonology. And this shows that in this dialect of Bengali, dental stops contrast with alveolar stops, and whereas some are dental and some are alveolar. As a result, they are contrastive. However, remember that in English, dental and alveolar stops do not contrast, but they can be allophonic, whereas in this language it is a contrast. So we have tan versus tan, and sat versus sat, and we have dan versus dan, and din versus dim. Okay, so we have dental and alveolar sounds. Whereas in American English also we might find dental and alveolar contrast. We saw that with the nasal, and when we saw nasals, and we saw dentalized nasals and dentalized alveolars, and that is possible for stops as well when there's a following dental fricative. So ate the could be dentalized because of following dental fricative, whereas and also as in eighth, the t can be dentalized. However, not unsurprisingly, because speaker A is a speaker of a language where dental and alveolar sounds are not contrastive, speaker A was completely unable to hear the Bengali contrast. And speaker A's inability to hear the dental alveolar distinction is not due to the lack of experience, but because speaker A does not have phonemic contrast in her language. So this shows something very important to us, that is the contrastiveness of two phonetically similar sounds leads speakers of the language that has the contrast to focus the perceptual attention on the contrasting sounds, and they fail to hear the distinctions. And native speakers hear the differences between phonemes, but they do not hear the difference between allophones, and that's precisely the reason that A could not hear the difference between dental versus alveolar, although it occurs allophonically, whereas in B's language, dental versus alveolar was a phonemic contrastive difference. So when this happens, speakers do not hear the distinction, do not hear the distinction. And when it is phonemic, speakers tune themselves to concentrate on the difference, and they are perceptually tuned to hear the difference. And related to that is the psychological reality of the phoneme. To the idea of the psychological reality of phoneme is the notion of the same sound. So groups of mutually non-distinctive sounds are grouped together into categories, that is the phonemes. And speakers usually believe that two allophones of the same phoneme are the same sound. So this is related to what we said just now, that speakers do not hear the distinction if it occurs allophonically. And allophones, when speakers utter allophones, they hear them as the same sounds. And for example, the vowels in ten and ted are different. One is nasalized and the other is not, because the following nasal in ten, we have a nasalized vowel, unlike in ted. So vowel becomes nasal when there is a following nasal. But do speakers hear these as different vowels? Speakers do not hear these as different vowels, because nasalization is not contrastive in English. So what is the notion of the same sound? If they exist allophonically, then the speakers hear the same sound. Okay. Now, extending that to other languages where nasalization occurs phonemically, for instance, French. In French, bon, bon or mais are phonemically distinct because their nasalization is contrastive. Vowel nasalization is phonemic, which means a and a are two different, since these are phonemic, I will use the slanted brackets. So, this is phonemic. As a result, now for French speakers, it is plain that a and a are different sounds. So, the difference between a French speaker and an English speaker is the phonemic structure of two languages. So, when they produce a in English, speakers will not hear the difference, whereas for French speakers, this is a vital difference because it will signal two different, can mean different words. Corresponding nasal and oral vowels in French count as different sounds because they are different phonemes, and they count as the same sound in English because they are allophones of the same phoneme. A few brief points about accents and transfer. And speakers internalize rules that derive the various allophones in their environments. The behavior of speakers attempting to pronounce the words of a language which is new to them, it's called foreign accent. And most often it persists after even years of practice with a second language. And the phenomenon of mispronunciation in second language is always attributable to the phonology of the first language, and that is called transfer. So, obviously, it is not mispronunciation, but speakers use their phonology, second language phonology, while speaking their first language. Now, importantly, there can be also other things there. So, you can have completely novel things in a second language, and that will not be transfer, that will be maybe universal language or some properties which appear, which is not there in the first language of the speaker or the language, the target language, and there can be completely novel innovations in a second language context. So, but most of the time there are a lot of transfers from the first language to the second language. And transfer is to consider phonology as specifying the set of things that are pronounceable in a given language. So, and the set of things that are pronounceable are the legal sequences of phonemes which are realized as appropriate allophone. And the sequences of phonemes in one language can be realized as certain allophones which are appropriate in that context for those speakers learning a second language. So, anything outside this set will involve one of the three properties, as we just said that there could be other innovations. So, it can be phonologically illegal because it contains an illegal phoneme. Any utterance containing the voiced uvular fricative is illegal in English because that never occurs in English. It can be phonologically illegal because it corresponds to an illegal sequence of phonemes because that is not allowed in the phonology of language or phonology of English, and English phonology does not permit the phonemes in certain orders. So, this is not possible in English, this is illegal in English. Burner is completely illegal in English, and it can be legal because it corresponds to an impossible distribution of phonemes in English. Example, this one, this word is, this is not possible in English. Why? Because in English, whenever there is a surface form with a final l, it has to be always velarized and it has to be fill. If a word of a foreign language is phonologically illegal for any of the three reasons, it will not be pronounced correctly by English speakers. And finally, in French, tant has a nasalized vowel alien to the English phoneme inventory. So in an English accent, this comes out as tant, where na is particularly short. And now, if we do a derivation of our English speakers of French, and these are the steps that will involve this. So we have this underlying form of tant, and we have a, and we have nasalization, which leads to a, and then we have nasal consonant, which is shortened, and as a result we have the surface English form of tant. And this now shows all these topics show something vital that we will again discuss, the psychological reality of the phoneme. And the phoneme is considered psychologically real because the speakers hear only the phoneme, they do not hear the allophone. And this can be extended to various contexts, as in transfer, as in foreign accent and transfer, and illegal sequences in a particular language, and how they manifest in another language. So when you are learning a second language, how the rhotic in French, which is not legal it's not a legal phoneme in English, and how it will appear as a certain manifestation of the English rhotic, and other things show the psychological reality of the phoneme of the first language that speakers are used to speaking. So this brings us to the third lecture on phonology, and in the next class we will continue with the psychological reality of phoneme, and also look at a big set of examples which show phonological derivations, and we will go through those examples so that we understand all the processes involved in phonological processes, and the methods for determining phonemes, and how do we arrive at the set of phonemes that are there in a language, and how do we analyze different phonological processes which are also there along with the phonemes which exist in that language. So thank you for listening, and we will keep talking about phonology in a couple of more lectures. Thank you.